everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This film is rated MA15+ for strong themes, sexualized imagery, violence, drug use, and coarse language. Being a massive fan of Damien Chazelle's brilliant filmography, which consists of Whiplash, La La Land, First Man, and more, his fifth feature film brings in a long list of A-list celebrities. Given that this was my sixth most anticipated film of 2023, I went in with a little bit of excitement. So this is Kier's Reviews, and this is my review of Babylon.
Cut. Hiya, I'm Nellie, LaRoy. So we going again?
Babylon is simply one of the wildest experiences I've ever had with a film before, and I'm certainly not understating it when I say that this movie has everything in it. From sex, to violence, to comedy, to outright gross sequences, Babylon has it all. I've never felt like I've ever had to prepare to see a movie before, but with what Damien Chazelle packs into these 3 hours, a lot is thrown at you as an audience member, and it does become very overwhelming once you leave the cinema, leaving you dazed and confused as you leave your seat. Nevertheless, Babylon is a movie worthy of its praise. Despite a few scenes being very uncomfortable and completely distasteful due to its lack of necessity, there is so much to admire about this movie that you can't help but be drawn into such an illustrious and crazy world that Chazelle so perfectly creates here. Every performance in this movie is nothing short of brilliant, and it gives Hollywood the appreciation it needs, whether it be through the ode that Chazelle gives to the revolutionary films of all time, the ones that pushed cinema that extra step, or whether it be through the way the story is told and presented. The experience that Babylon has in store is certainly one that you have to consider, and I say that for a few reasons. You have to prepare yourself for a big journey as it contains some very confronting imagery and never seems to apologise for its freedom, which I can understand to a certain extent, but when it's given an MA15+ classification in Australia, coming out of it really surprised me that it didn't earn an R18+ rating instead. The first thing I thought while walking out of Babylon was that it felt like the experience of watching The Wolf of Wall Street, but Babylon is 10 times more explosive and insane than Scorsese's epic. This movie knows how to break boundaries and make its audience react in certain ways, and while it certainly steps over the line more than a few times, it does have a lingering impact on the movie's progression as well as your viewing experience. Just to warn those that are on the younger side, about 10 people in my cinema left over the course of the 3 hours, so I can definitely say that this isn't a movie for everyone and will be very divisive among anybody that watches it, because it's strictly a love it or hate it situation, but personally, despite the disgusting aspects within it, I loved Babylon. Damien Chazelle has had a very successful career in directing over the last 13 years or so, and has created cinematic classics with films like Whiplash, La La Land, and even First Man to an extent. While Babylon may not reach the heights of Whiplash or La La Land, it's certainly one of his best films regardless. For Chazelle, he has a very high standard, so it's not a surprise to me that such an unhinged movie like this was able to come together so well under his direction. No matter what you end up thinking of the film, Babylon is bound to stay with you for at least the next hour once it's concluded. Chazelle has a way of directing that grips you, and the first act goes past so quickly because you're so engrossed in his filmmaking and storytelling, and that's what I loved about Babylon, was that it was so free in its storytelling that the actors never felt like they had to hold anything back, because as I said before, this movie has everything that you could imagine. Damien seamlessly weaves in every single genre besides animation, of course, to the point where it doesn't feel jaded or bizarre, but he knows what he's aiming for, and by the end, the finale is quite frankly his best in my opinion. The cast is without a doubt superb, and while there are a lot of characters to follow with so many additional plots and character arcs, it never feels like there is any sort of disconnect between any of them. It's told in the way that it should have been, and that's very much a credit to the editors as well as the writers, because it never feels like the focus is purely on one character and the rest are forgotten about. Each character's journey has its moments to shine, and as the audience goes through the entire story, more connections are made, and the more you get attached to these characters, the more the stakes of the final act become more heavy and nerve-wracking for the viewer. It's enticing all the way through, and while it may slow down at times and loses the captivating allure of the first act as the film progresses, it's never boring enough to want to get up and leave. Each scene felt like it had a purpose, but whether there were aspects in those scenes that didn't need to be there is another thing. The ensemble cast was phenomenal, and while most of Hollywood's A-list celebrities may only be reduced to cameos or a mere 10 minutes on screen, they all work together wonderfully to make Babylon memorable. Margot Robbie is exceptional during this wild ride. Whenever a scene isn't focusing on her or hasn't got her involved in some way, you immediately hope for the next sequence to have her in it. You long for her performance because she really commits to this role and gives it all she has, regardless of the content. You can tell that she is the standout from the first scene that you see her in. There's immense anticipation to see her character's story play out, and all of the praise that you hear about her performance in Babylon is so well deserved. The nominations she is receiving and will continue to receive throughout this awards season is definitely deserved because this is truly her most memorable and most committed performance of her entire career. She's the tool that Chazelle uses to bring people back into the experience if they ever fell out of it, and watching just how much Margot does in this movie is both surprising but at the same time exceptional. Whenever she was on screen, I was glued to her performance and couldn't believe that she could do what she was doing. You believed every moment of it through the tears, smiles, seductive body movements, and more. I haven't ever seen her like this, and I'm so glad she took all of the risks that she did to produce what she does in this film. Brad Pitt was fantastic too, and while he may not have had the standout performance in the cast, he still owned being in the lead role and captured once again a stunning performance that brought me back to his role as Cliff Booth from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. While this film can be perceived as similar to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and The Wolf of Wall Street, what differentiates Chazelle's interpretation, portrayal, and ode to Hollywood is the depth he gives to this story. There's room for his appreciation of cinema throughout, but unlike Tarantino's ode to Hollywood and his story about actors transitioning from TV to film, Chazelle's story of transitioning from silent cinema to sound movies had more of a deeper story to tell in order to truly expose the highs and lows of actors' careers, whether it be on their rise to stardom or their decrease in popularity. These 3 hours cover all of that. In a way, I found that Brad's performance in Babylon was very inspired by Leonardo DiCaprio's performance in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, as both roles have similar character arcs, and to see a bit of Leo's performance be woven into Brad's performance here was quite nice to see. What Babylon evokes from the interest and core of the story is that it focuses so heavily on longevity and how it can be perceived in both ways of either good or bad. Even though there is a lot of build-up and content that overshadows the meaning behind the film, the way Damien Chazelle tells this story is interesting, and by having such strong stars as Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie in these roles, really elevated the experience. I'd never heard of Diego Calva before, and while it seems that he is the main focus of the movie, he really made a big impact on the outcome of Babylon, and he was really entertaining to watch. He seems to be the character that ties everyone together and has a consistent journey through the other characters in the film. His chemistry with everybody is profoundly engaging and believable, and to feel as if we weren't watching Margot Robbie or Brad Pitt on screen but actually their characters as if it were a biopic really gave Babylon that extra step over the line that it needed to be able to stay in the viewers' minds afterwards. Calva adds to the reflection that most will have once finishing the film, but he also makes a name for himself in Hollywood now with this performance. It's a true wonder how Damien Chazelle was able to balance so many genres. There are sections of the story where you are laughing so hard that tears start forming in your eyes, but then there's scenes where you're genuinely fearful and uncomfortable at the events unfolding, caught in a real sense of pure tension. However, he incorporates the comedy, the action, the violence, the music, the eerie elements of the film to which some would call horror or more to the point a thriller, but he pulls all of it together without it feeling obvious or making it feel like he's taking you out of the experience by jarringly switching genres. You move right through the awe of one scene into the big amount of comedy in the next without a second thought. These transitional sequences have barely any obvious impact, and that's what makes the editing, writing, and directing so impressive. I do, however, believe that there was an overabundance of profanity and that it seemed as if there was heaps of swearing within every 10 seconds, and while a lot of it is great and adds to the comedic nature of the scenes, or just as a general way that the characters converse even, it does get to a point sometimes where it does feel overdone and loses its impact. Justin Hurwitz's score is perfect and probably his best score to date. His work with Chazelle on every single one of Damien's films always has a part of appreciation from anybody, and with Babylon it's his best work without a doubt. Even just the single piece of music from the trailers titled Voodoo Mama has an interesting yet subtle way of sticking in your brain, so much so that you genuinely can't get the music out of your head. You're repeating the notes of the music, and that proves just how incredible of a job both Chazelle and Hurwitz have done. It doesn't matter what you think of the movie itself, the music is undeniably the best aspect of Babylon. You could hate the movie with a passion, but there's no denying whatsoever that Justin Hurwitz's score isn't fantastic. It may go unnoticed during the sequences with heavy dialogue, but when you realise and focus on the music in different scenes, it adds to the experience and really makes you think about just how much Justin's compositions add to the world of Babylon. Like Margot's nominations, I understand Justin's praise and wins completely. It's his best score yet, even with Whiplash and La La Land under his belt. What I loved spotting was the amount of cast members that were thrilling to watch, but also were only in the movie for a short amount of time, some being 1-minute cameos. I adore Samara Weaving, so to see her be such a central character for a good 10 minutes within Margot's storyline made for a very giddy smile on my face, as I've always wanted Margot and Samara to work together in some sort of medium. She was brilliant, and I'm so glad that she was a part of this film, but the cameo that really surprised me in terms of how much I was enticed and gripped by their performance was Tobey Maguire. Even though he has a distinct 20 minutes that takes the story to its darkest and most disturbing places, he stuck with me because he genuinely got under my skin. His sequences were so intimidating and overwhelming that it made you panic while watching these scenes play out. There's a scene, which I won't spoil, where you don't know what you'll see next, and along with Tobey, it feels like the Gimp scene in Pulp Fiction in relation to how uncomfortable and confronting that scene felt. It's not disturbing in terms of its graphic nature, but just with how uncensored and unnerving it became. It's undeniable that Babylon does have its issues here and there, and one of the common complaints about it will be its overlong runtime of 189 minutes, and while I've seen Avatar: The Way of Water 5 times now and that was longer than Babylon, this film felt like it dragged on after the big first act. It was always engaging, but there were certainly times where some sequences didn't need to be as long as they were, and while I'm sure upon rewatch that it'll make more sense as to why each scene is where it is, it easily could have been 2 hours and a half and still had the same impact. It's scenes that are the most disgusting that proved to be the most unnecessary. There were different ways of going about advancing the plot with the same direction and same outcomes, but when it became gross to the point where it just didn't feel right to be watching it, it instantly makes you uncomfortable and shocked for no particular reason. The first 5 minutes of Babylon is extremely overdone in the most repulsive ways, and it's not that disgusting things can't be in movies, it's just that it wasn't integral to the plot and wasn't needed in order to keep the story going. Other than that, everything else in Babylon was fantastic. The colour palette and cinematography can't go unappreciated either, as there are some moments where you just look at the screen and just smile because of how gorgeously shot it is. I'm definitely interested, especially in the final scene, to listen to the eventual director's commentary track on the Blu-ray, because there are some parts that are just downright confusing, but make sense in the same breath. It's a difficult thing to describe, but the ending was both one of the most powerful and honourable endings I've ever seen, while also being an indulgent sensory overload. The costumes are gorgeous and really represent the time periods in which Babylon is set in. Margot's red dress is bound to become iconic, and I can't wait to see how its staple in costume design is reflected on in the future. The rest of the costumes, the production design, and the screenplay all have such a big impact on the final outcome of this movie, and while I really do appreciate how ambitious this film became because of those aspects, it's a very overwhelming but fun experience because of just how raw, honest, and unrestricted it is, and it makes for a true triumph.
Put the kid on it.
The kid?
Yeah, the kid, the Mexican I brought. He's great. What's your name?
Me? Manuel.
Right, Manuel. Manuel's great. Put Manuel on it.
You have experience with strikes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, these are all junkies from Skid Row, so they're pretty violent.
Babylon is certainly a movie that will provoke conversations, and if you're not shocked by some part of this, I'd be very surprised. But nevertheless, it's an experience that definitely can't be matched. It's not like anything that you've seen from Damien Chazelle before due to its insanity and extravagance. It's unapologetically spontaneous, wild, uncensored, overwhelming, and outrageous, and while some scenes do take away from the perfect score I could have given it, Babylon is certainly a movie that embraces all of its aspects and comes together to create a film that will remain with its audiences. Margot Robbie is phenomenal and deserves every nomination and win that comes her way, as she's at her best in this film, and while it may not be Damien Chazelle's best movie, it's certainly his most memorable. While it does have a tendency to be a bit overlong at times, there's still so much to admire in these 3 hours. However, if you're not prepared to see absolutely anything and everything in this film, you're going to get quite a shock at how far over the line this movie steps. It's definitely a fun and wild ride, but I loved almost every single second of it, so I'll give Babylon a 9 out of 10. Thank you all so much for watching. Are you going to see Babylon? Let me know below. As always, be sure to have a look at my previous reviews of Operation Fortune Ruse de Guerre and Megan. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram for all of my latest movie reviews. This has been Kier's Reviews, signing off for now.
Don't forget to like, follow, and obey.